All right, good morning, everybody. We've reset the internet, so hoping that that's going to help this morning. I've just gotten back from a hunt. A lot of people that know me, I try to take these couple of months during hunt season, kind of to revamp and be able to get out in the nature and hang out with everybody, with some of our friends that hunt, and it's been really good. With all the work that I know that we do here with our ministry, we kind of need to get away. Good morning, Tammy. Hope you're doing well. But I wanted to share a little bit about an incident that happened to me years ago when the Lord really brought me back out of the wilderness into the promised land. Basically, when I was running from the Lord, and then the Lord started to bring me back. And what I mean by bring me back is I gave my heart, back to the Lord. I was saved, but I was running from God, And of course, that's an oxymoron, saying that you're saved but running from God. Because if you're saved and you're running from God, that means you're away from God, no matter what. Being saved is not a ticket into the kingdom. You've got to walk with Him, and that's one of the things He was teaching me when He brought me back and asked me to come back to Him and walk in His ways. That was the key, is that I had to start learning again to walk in His ways, because I had practiced lawlessness, and it had become a habit. And when you have a habit in your brain or in your mind, I don't know if you've ever studied these things, but when you have a habit, you've got to break it with some other habit. And a lot of times, a lot of people can't break those habits in their own strength. They have to be led by the Spirit. And that's the key in breaking a lot of habits that we get in, is that we've got to run to the Spirit every time we have that habit to come up. We've got to run to the throne. And that's basically what He started showing me and teaching me as He was bringing my mind back into subjection to the ways of God. Because my mind had been so used to being subjected in the ways of the flesh and of the enemy's ways that there was a habit there, And one of those habits that I had was lust. Now, lust is not just things that are perverted. It's also things that are lustful, where you lust for the things of this world. But at this point, I was not a good person. I was young, and I was had a lot of issues when it came to lust. And I found out later, though, that one of the reasons why I dealt with this lust is that when I was 6 years old, 6 or 7, I believe, my mom let me go down to the soda shop. And some of you elderly folks that are watching this knows what a soda shop is. It was an old drugstore that had a soda fountain area. They'd make you these homemade cherry cokes and homemade chocolate shakes, and it was just down two stores down from our place that my dad actually owned a cleaners. And she let me walk down to this little pharmacy we'd call it the soda shop. And when I walked in there, I do it quite a bit. I happened to look, and there was a magazine with a lady that was dressed almost with nothing on. It was a pornography book, and it was kind of covered, but I happened to see it. And there was a spirit on it, and it jumped on me. It literally just jumped on me, and I didn't go into I turned around, and I was almost staggering because I didn't know what happened to me. And I turned back around. Instead of going up there to get my soda, I turned back around and came back to the shop. And my mom says I was almost dazed, like I was out staggering. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm okay." And she said, I wish I would have done something then, but I didn't understand, how the spirit world worked. But when I walked in, I was not myself. And it had attacked me. as a young boy. Well, that thing followed me for years and years and years, because just as you've been assigned by God certain assignments, certain angels and things from the Lord, the enemy also assigns things and demonic activity to certain people's lives as well. He does the same thing that the Lord does, except perverted. He tries to do the same type of principles and the enemy uses some of God's principles and twists them his way. And long story short, all those years, I would fight lust and pornography. I mean, I remember even I was walking through the woods. These woods I would always walk through. They were like my woods. I made trails in them, and I was just a young boy. And one day I was walking through one of my trails, and there was a stack of pornography books in my trail. Believe it or not. Of course, I found out later that demons can actually do that. They can bring stuff into this realm that will trip you up. And so I was constantly dealing this, and I didn't realize that the enemy would feed me. Even though I would see those, like sometimes I'd see those books, I'd try to fight it and run away, but I had already, when I walked up to them on that trail, it was obvious. You looked at them, you saw them, because you're trying to figure out what was in your trail, and you run away, but that thing was still just eating on me. And it was constant. It was a constant beating of this thing, just trying to wear me out. And I started giving into it. And but when the Lord started bringing me back, per se, in my mind, back to the Lord in my spirit, He started showing me how to beat this thing. And I've learned this not only through Scripture, but I've also learned it through my own experiences, actually trying it and doing it. And I want to read you a couple of things, because this kind of goes along with what we're going to talk about. But if you want to write them down, in Genesis 39, you can start in verse 10. If you remember Joseph was a handsome man, and he ended up being in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife just adored him and was constantly trying to get Joseph to sleep with him, and he would constantly try to beat her off and keep her away. And there was a time where she grabbed him, and then when she grabbed him, he tore away from her, and of course he left his garment, with her, and then of course after that he got thrown into prison because the Potiphar's wife lied because she was mad because he didn't give in. And that's kind of what happens with us. A lot of times these lust spirits will try to attach themselves. They'll beat you and beat you and beat you and try to keep taunting you until you give in, like she did here. But if you notice, Joseph didn't give in, and he ran from her, and he ended up that by him doing the truth, it put him in the dungeon. But one of the issues here is that no matter what happens, no matter how the enemy beats you up, we can't give in. Because anytime you do the truth, even at the point that it's going to cost you, and you do the truth, eventually God will raise you out of those dungeons, out of all the stuff that you've been through. If you know you've done the truth will eventually set you free, as it did with Joseph. Because Joseph was trying his best to do the truth, but yet it seemed like the truth was always causing him to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. But actually, the deeper you go in the hole by doing truth, the higher you will go into the penthouse of God. And but we've got to remember that. And so a lot of this, a lot of times when we do the truth, speak the truth, especially these days, you're going to pay for it. But I'd much rather pay for speaking the truth, doing the truth, than not to do it. Because you don't want to pay for not doing the truth, because it's a bad judgment. But if you would definitely want to pay for doing the truth, because eventually God will reward you for actually walking in the truth. And there's a couple of scriptures that I would like to just share with you, because it's huge for me. It's big for me because it's kept me in a place to where I can run to the Lord and I know the Lord will be there. One of them is John 8, verse 32. He said, "If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The key word there is abide in my word. In other words, we've got to walk in it. To abide in the word of God, you've got to walk in it, even if it hurts. And a lot of times you'll know that a lot of our problems is not on the outside, it's on the inside, isn't it? And there's another one here, and I'll finish here really quickly, and you have to excuse me pulling up some of these scriptures because it's a key and it's very precious to me, is Ephesians 6, verse 14. It says, "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace, above all, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit." And one of the things I like to say is, when he says gird yourself with gird your waist with the belt of truth, staying in the truth, walking in the truth, keeps you from being exposed. It keeps you from being uncovered. Even though you may get slammed, even though your flesh may not like doing the truth, I guarantee you, if you do the truth, you will be covered. Even though you may go through, the trials of actually doing the truth, the hits that you do doing the truth, the rejections that you go through by doing the truth, you will be covered. You may feel the pain of doing the truth, but your spirit is actually covered, and eventually God brings you into a brand new place with authority. And one of the main things he says here is praying always with prayer and supplication in the Spirit. And then lastly, and I'll finish the story that I was going to share, it says in 2 Corinthians 3:18, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory." And just by the Spirit of the Lord. And my story with this thing is that as I got older, I wish I knew some of the things I know now back then, but of course now I know them because I've walked through some of this hell of having to deal with these spirits, evil spirits, is that if I ran to the Lord, I was going to be okay. If I ran to truth, I was going to be okay. It may have hurt me, but when it was over, I felt clean and my consciousness was clear. I don't know if you've ever felt your conscience being clear, but there's nothing like having a clear conscience. I've had many times where my conscience clear. You did wrong, and your conscience is not clear. It is awful feeling because you live in under condemnation. But when the Lord brought me back, that was one of the things that I had to deal with, was this lust. And even though the Lord was visiting me in my hotel rooms during those times of visitations during my golf career, into my golf career, he would still let me walk through these temptations so that I could experience what it was like to overcome them with the Lord and with truth and with the shield of faith. And when this stuff started coming back to me, when I came to the Lord and I started walking with him, I would get these overwhelming lust feelings and these images to come to my head. There would be even times where I would be sitting with someone and there'd be a woman there talking as well. And then all of a sudden I'd get these feelings and that would come over me and it would just make me feel embarrassed. Of course, a lot of people didn't know what was going on because I definitely wouldn't let them share it with them because there's so much shame. And I started asking the Lord, I said, Lord, how can I, break this thing? Is there any way you can just lay your hands on me and break this thing? He said, I want you to break it with me. And I thought, how am I going to break this with you? Because I've tried my best, and I didn't realize I was doing it out of my own out of my own power. And long story short, he said, whenever this lust comes to you, he said, I want you to run to the throne. And I said, what does that mean? He said, when any time these things come to you, he said, I want you to, wherever you are, it doesn't matter wherever you are, I want you to get up and I want you to find a place very quickly and I want you to pray with me every time these things come upon you. And I was so desperate. I don't know if any of you guys out there have been so desperate to where you'd do anything to get rid of it, And I was desperate because I've been down in the places of desperation. And if you're desperate, you'll do anything with God to get rid of that tormenting things that are going on in your life. And so when these things would come, when these spirits would come to actually torment me, I would just start praying. It didn't matter where I was. I remember when I'll never forget this one incident. I was dealing with this thing that would come upon me, and I was sitting with a gentleman and his wife at a seafood restaurant. Lord, this was like, I can't remember, back in the 90s. But I was sitting at a seafood restaurant, and all of a sudden, this lust came over me. And this friend of mine with his wife, they were good friends. I mean, it's not like I desired his wife, but this lust stuff came over me. And I remember the Lord telling me, go and pray every time these things come. And man, at that time, I wasn't in the place to do prayer, if you know what I'm saying. But I was desperate. And sure enough, as soon as this stuff came on me, I jumped up. I said, excuse me for a moment. And it probably looked like I was having a stomach ache and had to go to the bathroom real fast. And I jumped up out of that table and I ran to the bathroom. And when I got to that bathroom, I got into a stall. Y'all know how those nasty stalls is. Women too. Y'all know how nasty some of those places are. I got in that stall and I fell on my knees in that nasty floor. And I said, Lord, please help me. Here I am. I'm doing what you tell me. Now, I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel like the glory of God or anything like that. But the Bible says that if we turn toward the Lord, he will transform us. And if we behold him, we're beholding him as in a mirror and we're transformed into his glory. But that doesn't mean you have to feel it. Sometimes you just have to grit it and turn to the Lord. If your consciousness even thinks about the Lord, your spirit is facing Jesus, whether you know it or not. And it's Jesus' power and his spirit transforming you without feeling. And I've had to learn that. Even reading the Bible, even if you don't understand what the Bible is saying, if you're reading these words, they're powerful for you, even if you don't feel it. So they're transforming. They're like a surgeon. You're asleep, but it's transforming you. It's doing surgery on you while you're still asleep in your consciousness and can't understand it. But it's still doing powerful things for you, even while you can't understand it or feel it. And that's what was happening. I didn't realize that, but that's what was happening. And so I remember falling on my knees, and I was sitting there praying. And I was just saying, Lord, the only thing I could think of was just thank you, Lord, for this day. Lord, I just ask that you help me during this hour. Help me, Lord. This lust is coming over me. I'd even say, I'm sorry, Lord, for letting this thing happen. He'd interrupt me every now and then and say, you're being attacked. But I'd still say, I'm sorry, Lord, because I wasn't yet mature to understand how to really pray. Because I was always saying, I'm sorry. But I didn't realize that saying I'm sorry was really out of guilt and not out of letting him, transform me. The guilt was coming from the enemy so that I could stay under condemnation. But I had forgotten that the Lord said, I want you to partner with me. So he wouldn't try to make you feel guilty to try to partner with him. And so I sat there and I prayed. And when I prayed, for like 10 minutes in that stall, of course, they probably thought something was wrong with me. And of course they did. I came back out and man, I just felt like I, just exhausted. But I came to the table, sat down, and all of a sudden I just felt so much better. I felt like I'd been washed. And I was able to sit there without being tormented by the enemy. Well, this would happen over and over. There would be times where the enemy just come out of the blue and I would just go find a place real quick. Sometimes I'd be talking to a group in a hallway and I'd say, excuse me, and I'd walk around the corner, just enough to go and pray. Sometimes I'd just sit there and start praying in unknown tongues. And it would just help me be cleansed from it. But the thing that I started finding out, the more I did that, as the enemy came to me, as I would pray, and sometimes the enemy would come to me and throw this lust on me, and then it would make me feel depressed, so I would run to the Lord, and sometimes instead of prayer, I would actually just sing a prayer to the Lord. And I'd find myself worshiping during that time. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Just as long as I ran to the Lord when this thing hit, I knew I would be okay. And I realized the power of it was getting weaker. It was weaning from my life. And eventually, it started going away. It started fading out. And then I asked the Lord to give me some understanding of what was going on. And what he taught me is when the enemy would come, I would run to the throne every time. When the enemy would come, I'd run to the throne. The enemy would come, I'd run to the throne. And I found myself, just as I had this habit of when the enemy would come, I'd run into his throne. I would take it in, and I would basically be as intimate with his stuff as I would with being intimate with the Lord's stuff. But I reversed it. Instead of accepting the enemy's invitation and going that route, I would refuse the invitation and take the invitation of God. And I didn't realize I was actually making a new habit. Isn't that crazy? So when the enemy would come, I would go and basically lust after God. I would go after the Lord. And eventually the enemy starts realizing by them coming to you, it makes you go to the Lord. And you're creating a habit in your brain. And a lot of times, it would see if I would take the bait. But I would take the bait. I would take the bait of the Lord, because anytime the enemy comes and hands you bait, there's also another hand on the other side handing you a wonderful morsel of God. You can either take the bait of the enemy, or you can take the blessings of God. You've got demonic activity in his hand that offers you bait. Then on the other side, you've got the blessings of God in his hand handing it to you as well. So you're standing there in the middle. One's got, these tasty trifles of lust and stuff, or depression, or some type of addiction. And on this side, you've got the hand of the Lord saying, here's your blessings. And I've learned that most of the time when the enemy comes at you with a tasty morsel of the world, the Lord is actually there to give you an upgrade. And it's a blessing. And so I started realizing every time the enemy would come to me, if I'd run to the Lord, I would go higher. I would get a blessing from the Lord. And I started reading some of even David's Psalms, and I understood why David would run to the Lord. They wrote a lot of times, we think David was such a spiritual man at times, and, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of those Psalms, if you'll really read it, he was doing what I'm talking about. If he was in trouble, he would run to the throne. He'd grab a psalmist. He'd grab a musician, and he would fall on his face and he would start praying, because his mind was leaning toward the fleshly route instead of toward the Lord's route. And he would run to the Lord every time he would get all this stuff and turmoil in his life. When he would be even depressed, he would run to the Lord, sing to the Lord a new song, And he started creating a habit. And that's what started happening with me. God was actually building a stronghold of God in my brain and it was throwing out the stronghold of the enemy. So by me partnering with God, it was bringing down every stronghold that was against God in my mind. And he eventually built a strong tower in my mind that I could run to when the enemy tries to attack me. And it's worked every time. You can't lose by partnering with the Spirit. And I'm not saying you can't. You're not going to feel sometimes. You're not going to feel God when you're sometimes tempted. When you're running to the Lord, and you feel a temptation of depression or addiction or drugs or whatever. It doesn't matter what addiction it is, whether it be lust or whether it be depression, drugs, you name it. As soon as you get the wave of temptation, you can take on and get on your prayer. Surfboard or whatever, and ride the wave of God instead of riding the wave of the enemy that brings destruction. And I told this lately. I told this to a young man. He opened up not too long ago about he was dealing with pornography, and later on he came to me and talked to me. He said, "How do I break this stuff? Because it comes on me and I don't know what to do." And I told him that. I said, if you'll run to the throne, and I gave him these scriptures, every time it hits you, and I said, you're going to want to take the temptation because you're in a habit. But if you'll start running to the throne, when the enemy wants you to run to his throne, when you run to God's throne, you will build eventually a habit, and the enemy will leave you alone because the enemy will realize, my gosh, every time I'm coming to Brad, he goes to God. And so they'll eventually leave you alone for a good while in that particular incident, in that particular temptations of your life. Now, sometimes every now and then they'll come back and knock on the door, like wait 2 or 3 years and knock on the door in that area. And you've got to remember, I've got to run to the throne. Don't try to handle it on your own. You've got to go to the Lord. The enemy would love for you to handle it on your own, because if you're handling on your own, you're already in the enemy's camp. Oh, you got to get that one. Because if you're doing it in your own strength, baby, she's going to get her hair fixed. So if you're trying to do it in your own strength, you're already in the enemy's camp. He's already got you tricked. You've got to do it partnering with God. So every time this stuff comes, you've got to, run to the Lord, because eventually the enemy just says, man, we're not going to come to Brad. We're not going to come to Kathy, or we're not going to come to Ben anymore in this area, because we've got to find a new area, because every time we come to them, they go to the throne. We're actually helping them go to the throne and go higher. The devils will say, every time I come, they go to another dimension. So I'm not even going to go to that fella. Nobody's really going to, if you resist the devil and draw near to God, he draws near to you, and you resist the devil, he eventually flees. And the reason he flees is because when he comes in, you go to the Lord. And when you go to the Lord comes in. The Lord comes in and steps in on your behalf, and now he has to face the enemy. The enemy has to face God. And he has to flee, because he can't beat God. So every time you go to the Lord, when the enemy's standing at your gate, the Lord will come out and stand at your gate and face the enemy for you. And eventually you build a habit of running to God instead of running to the enemy when those temptations come, or even doing it in your own strength. And we have got to get this. And there's no telling how many people I've talked to that are dealing with stuff. Most of them Christians. They find themselves, trying to do it in their own strength, rebuking the air, and you've got to partner with God, and you got to partner with the Spirit. And when you partner with the Spirit, that means you're running to God for help, and you're praying with Him. You pray with all supplications, It says praying always with prayers and supplications. We have got to, pretty much get that, because it says, which is the Word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplications for all the saints. Man, I'm telling you what, if we're going to be leaders, we have got to be doing this, but most of the time when we have problems come in our life, man, we find ourselves trying to figure it out. And we forget we've got God. And a lot of times when you forget you've got God, man, you are in an enemy's camp trying to do it on your own. Because when you're trying to figure it out on your own, man, the enemy's got you already tied. It's awful. And so the Lord built a stronghold of truth in me. And man, it doesn't matter what comes my way. Most people that know me, I am going to tell you the truth, even if it hurts me. I'm going to tell you the truth, because I've learned that if I can stay in the truth, keep my stuff even wide open, being exposed to the truth instead of trying to cover things up, it will always keep you clean. Now, it doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what, they say. Man, I shouldn't say that, or I shouldn't be so open about, this issue. Man, I'm going to get rejected. Well, good. If you're rejected by the people, you're accepted by God if you're doing the truth. Because I'd much rather be accepted in the kingdom than being accepted in this world. And we have got to fight that peer pressure. We have got to, being accepted by man is not good in the kingdom. But worrying or being concerned about being accepted in the kingdom, now that is a good worry, if you could say that. That is something that truly we need to be concerned about. I would much rather have favor with God than to have to bow down to the favors of peer pressure and of this world to be accepted in this world. And these days, speaking the truth, a lot of people don't like. And everybody's doing what is right in their own eyes. And that in itself is demonic. We've got to do what's right in God's eyes instead of our own eyes and our own minds. So I hope that helps. Run to the throne. If you have to, run to the bathroom, get on your knees. Run down the hallway, and find a closet. It doesn't matter. It's going to sound so stupid, and your mind's going to be, it's going to say, there's no place here to pray. Well, you will find a place to pray if you're desperate enough for you and God to build a stronghold in your life. Wouldn't you much rather build a stronghold of God in your mind than to sit there and allow the enemy to build his stronghold while you're not doing anything with God? Man, I'd much rather suffer with God than to suffer with the enemy. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I hope that helped. Oh, he brought me look at here. He brought me hey buddy, he brought me a toy. He's something, man. Well, guys, we love you, and I hope it helped. Keep the belt of truth on. Gird your waist. Don't let your pants fall down. In other words, keep it up. Keep walking in truth. And God will keep you covered. Truth will keep you covered. Even if it hurts, stay in the truth. All right. I love you guys, and thanks for tuning in. Sorry we had to do it today, but normally we do it on Tuesday, but I was out in Kansas at that point, and I had no service. But we're back. We love you, and thank you for your love and support. Keep supporting us if you can. Get on our website, help donate, and keep this thing rolling. We couldn't do all this stuff without you. Honestly, we couldn't. And we would appreciate it if you keep supporting us in prayer. And if you can't support us in prayer, support us with your finances. If you can't support us with your finances, support us with your prayers. It doesn't really matter. As long as we have support, it's going to be great. We've got to support each other, don't we? We can't do this on our own. I didn't get here where God's got me on my own. God's not just spirit, but he's also in people. And the way he holds us up, holds these ministries up, is through his people. That is God as well. And pray for your church. Pray for your pastors and your leaders. They're not going to always do it right. We're all trying to walk this thing out and learn as we walk it out. Sometimes, leaders will try to fake it, and they're faking it. Most of the time, if they're faking it until they're making it, just because they're struggling, that's when you really got to pray for them and hold them up, because they're just like you. They're not any different. So we love you a lot, and just keep going after it, and know that we're all going to make mistakes, every one of us. But if we make the mistake, run to the throne and just hang out with the Lord. He will help you. Stay in that place of truth. Keep yourself girded with truth. All right, guys, we love you, and keep it up. We're praying for you guys too. All right. Have a good one. Love you. See you, Michael.